That's great.
Perfect. Vikram and Veer, over to you.
Okay, so I guess I'll start by introducing myself. Hi there. My
Hello.
name is Veer Sagar, as you can see, and I currently study at the ISB, the International School Bangalore. I am an 11th grader, and I think some things that I would say I'm passionate about are building architecture, building sustainable architecture, and building tools to promote social consciousness. So at Project Mahatma, I have just launched the Empathy Project, which allows you to understand the struggles of an Indian sports player, develop empathy for them, and then convert that empathy into action by volunteering and donating to our incredible nonprofit partners.
Oh, we got some background music for you.
Yes, and I am also currently designing a university in rural India, which I'm super excited about. And now over to Vikram.
Hi, so my name is Vikram Sagar. I'm also an 11th grader at the same school, the International School Bangalore. So I'd say I'm extremely passionate about fashion, football, economics, and computer science. So at Project Mahatma, I've launched Zlatan. So it's essentially a sustainable fashion platform that uses AI to help people shop more sustainably. I'm also working on launching my own sustainable brand later this year. So do look out for that. Yeah,
that's exciting. That's a wonderful to hear both of your varied interests, and also trying to create more value in the world. So happy to hear it.
Thank you. So I think we could get started. So we read your incredible. Oh wait, Veer, are you here?
I'm just there.
Okay.
We might have just lost Veer, but he'll be back, I'm sure.
He'll be back. Why don't you get started, Vikram?
Yeah.
Why don't you get started?
Yeah. So we read your incredible UPenn commencement speech about your life-affirming pilgrimage through India. So the question is, what was the most touching experience you had on your pilgrimage, and what did it teach you about humanity?
Yeah, well, that was a while back when I used to have hair. So it's been a while, but it was so formative for me. So my wife and I, at some point in our service journeys, we said that we really have to do something together that we wouldn't do alone. And one of our pursuits was very spiritual, to get to know ourselves. And so we ended up going on this walking pilgrimage, where we walked. We went to the Gandhi ashram because Gandhi was an inspiration. We walked south, and we said we would eat whatever food is offered and sleep wherever place is offered. And very, very different than like the traditional mindset of, Vikram, you're into sports. I think both of you, you and Veer, are into sports. I was too. I wanted to be a tennis pro. Actually, I was playing 6+ hours a day. I was hardcore into that, and you have this notion of just like you try, and if you don't succeed, then you try harder. And what that does is it puts a lot of premium on your shoulders. And at some point you realize that there's actually deeper resources than just your ego alone. And so I had that conquest mentality, certainly did. And so I was like, okay, you try and you try harder if something doesn't work. But on a pilgrimage, it's opposite, because it's not so individualistic. Because you realize that your effort is not what's gonna allow serendipity or grace to sort of inspire somebody else to offer you food, or to offer you a place to stay, or even to offer you just rest or a shade. I mean, so many things you need walking in India. And so for me, that was a fundamental shift, to go from a very individualistic mindset to actually being reliant on others and seeing how my ego transforms along the way. And does that make me dependent and weaker, or does that actually make me stronger? And so continually, there was this, unfolding every single day. We would be like, we would be, the ego is taking a beating and you're like down on the ground and then you're rising back up and you're looking at the whole process of what is it, where is your strength, where is your weakness, where is your resilience coming from? What are your deepest aspirations? It's really hot. Let's say it's 110 degrees, like let's say it's 42, 45 degrees centigrade, right? In Gujarat, that's possible. And it certainly was when we were walking. And, people haven't been kind to you and you're like insecure and all these fears come up and you're worried about your wife's worried about you. And in the middle of all this, you notice that, someone is carrying a haystack and it's a little too heavy for them. Like in that moment, is it going to be about me and all the problems I'm going through? Or can I relate to him and say, hey, you're like my grandfather. Can I carry your haystack for you? And you do that and repeatedly, like to generate this intention of goodwill. So it's very powerful. But in terms of like a story, if you were to say, I mean, there were so many stories. Every day was like phenomenal. But one thing that like has stayed with me since then, I don't think I've been able to eat without doing a prayer of gratitude, like a single meal. You can't. Like anyone who does this in the way that we did it, you simply cannot, because you just have so much gratitude. And gratitude, not just that you have a meal, gratitude for all the forces that allowed that meal to come into existence. So you would have, so as we were walking, there would be people who would borrow food to feed us. Now you look at it with an analytical mind and you're like, okay, should I take it? Should I not? Is their hunger more important? Is mine more important? Like, and that's an analysis on a very different plane. When you start to see that it's actually an expression of their love, and their love is more valuable than all of this kind of cost benefit analysis they teach you. One of you is studying at ISV, right? So, it's like the ego and the mind's cost benefit analysis pales in comparison to this very different axis. And what is our relationship to that axis? And so we would continually, be in this mode. I remember we walked into this one house, this hut. In fact, even before we walked in, this guy approached us. We were walking, we weren't sure where we were going. We're in some super remote rural area. And this guy comes up out of nowhere and he's like, you guys look like you could use a place to stay. And we were like, yeah, we could. I was trying not to be greedy, but I was like, yeah, we really could. And then he's like, you guys look really hungry too. And I was like, oh, is it that obvious? And he's like, well, I would love to host you. And I would love to take you to our place, but I have to warn you, it's like a bit interior, and B, I have no running water, no electricity. I'm a very financially poor person. Would that be, would you be okay with that? I was like, oh man, are you kidding me, man? Yes, that would be great. Like, and so he took us there and he tells his wife, now clearly unannounced guests, right? And like a very small hut and there's not much inside. And he tells his wife, he says, God's guests have come to our doorstep. Can you make them some food? Now, of course, all of you are, in India, you would know Atithi Devo Bhava is like a very common practice, that the guest is divine. The guest is an expression of God. And so they look at us, they look at anybody in that way. And so he tells his wife, like, can you go and grab some food? So and his wife's like, okay, I'll go make some. And so she goes, whisks out the back, comes back. And since we were guests, they made a little extra sweet dish, So the food they would have is like, rice and very, very spicy dal. And it's very spicy, so you eat very little. This is how that was it. But because we were guests, and they made a little sweet dish, on the side. And because I have a sweet tooth and I was being greedy, I was like, oh, you're supposed to save the dessert for the last, but I was like, let me just grab this right now, and I did. So I ate the dessert first, which is not what you're supposed to do, but I did that. And I put the first bite in my mouth, and I realized that it had no sugar. They couldn't afford sugar. And my first impulse, when you're so tired, when you're so hungry, when you're so like taking a beating in all directions, you're thinking, oh my God, my lucky day, I got like, dessert, right? And with that expectation, you're launching into this dessert and you get a sugarless bite. And in that moment, the question that comes up is, are you tasting the sugar, or are you tasting their love? And it's easy intellectually to say, yeah, I'm tasting their love, but to deeply acknowledge that, right? And so I actually finished my dessert first without the sugar. And then, my wife and the gentleman, they were both eating, and they ate in the right order. And so they finished their rice and dal first, and then they got to the dessert. And the man, tastes it, and there's no sugar. He looks at his wife, and he says to her again, he says, God's people have come to our doorstep. Can you go and borrow some sugar? And when you see that day in and day out, like, how can you ever have a meal without saying a moment of silence, without having a moment of gratitude? I certainly haven't been able to do that. And so I do that. I close my eyes before every meal, and just expressing gratitude, not just for the food, but for the immense conditions of love that allow that food that's there in every grain of rice, even if I'm not able to intellectually understand that. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question, but it was one of those formative events in my life, the whole pilgrimage. So it was day in and day out of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's really inspirational, actually. So let's move on to your TED Talk at Berkeley. So you started with an inspiring anecdote describing Vinoba Bhave's work in tackling income inequality in India. So in 1953, Vinoba Bhave, who was named by Gandhi as his official successor, walked over 70,000 kilometers, going from one village to another, convincing rich landlords to give a sixth of their land to poor farmers. So as you described, he didn't force them. He didn't coerce them or shame them, but he inspired them to be more generous. Thanks to his work, over 5 million acres of land was given to the poor. It was the largest peaceful transfer of land in human history. So what key insights can we learn from this story, and how can we use those insights to create more generosity around us?
Yeah, well, this is fantastic that you keyed in on that particular element, because it is very unique. Because most of us, when we think about creating change in the world, we think that I need a bigger hammer, right? I need more money, I need more power, I need more resources, I need more fame, whatever. You can go down the list and you say, if I'm stronger than you, if I have a bigger hammer than your resistance, then all of a sudden I'm able to enact the change I want. Vinoba took an opposite approach, right? He said that actually, I don't want to coerce you into anything. I believe that the human heart unfailingly responds to the advances of love. Now, we all believe that, but at some level, we're kind of weak in that belief. And so we get very transactional. Right? We say, this is how all give and take is based. It's like, I work for you, you work for me. It's like, I give you a salary, you do this much in return for me. So everything's very, very transactional. And Vinoba had faith in something deeper. He said that if you actually are moved by love, in fact, that's the title of a book that was written about him called Moved by Love, really worth reading, by a French person. But if you are moved by love, you have a very different organizing principle. It's going to be much deeper, it's going to last a lot longer, and it's going to be regenerative as opposed to degenerative, right? If you motivate somebody with fear, with power, or with greed, right? You say, hey, you do this, I'm going to give you this carrot. And guess what happens? They may do it, but pretty soon they're going to be like, I need 2 carrots. Right? Pretty soon they're going to be like, I need 3. And if you don't have 3 and you want the whole system to propagate, you have to go out and create that growth. And if that growth at some point is destroying the planet, you still, you're still going to insist on that growth. This is what we're doing with the world today. That we need this infinite growth. And why we need that infinite growth is because we're so addicted to this pattern. Now, Vinoba showed a remarkably different way of doing it. He did something that is absolutely unprecedented in human history. 5 million acres, Vikram, is like greater than the size of many countries in the world. So people are fighting. I mean, you know all about this all over the world, right? People are fighting for narrow strips of land, and they're killing hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people and fighting for decades-long wars. In this context, Vinoba is like, oh, I know how to get 5 million acres. Like, oh, how? It's like, but you need power? Do you need it? No, I just need love. He's like, oh, where can I buy that love? Oh, you don't have to go buy it anywhere. It's in your heart already. Okay, well, do I need to say slick things to other people and message it right and be all like, super posh? It's like, no, you don't need to do any of that. You just have to be real. And because the other person also has that spark of love, and these sparks connect. And so literally he would go in, like, imagine, right? Veena and Vikram are like in this village. He would come and he said, okay, you guys are rich landowners. And let's say Manu is like a poor person in your community. Now he would come in and he would say, he would first be himself. And you're like, wow, this guy is like so unconditionally loving. He's, it's like there's something in you that speaks to that. And you're like, oh, there's something good here. I'm magnetized by it. And then he would say, look, if you had five kids and you have all this land, how would you distribute it? And the guy's like, one of you say that, look, after I pass away, I'll distribute it in 5 parts to 5 of my kids. So then he comes and he says, would you adopt me as your 6th son? And people are like, oh, are you kidding me? Yeah, of course I'll adopt you, dude. You're like such a person. You have such a great smile. You have so much love. You've been walking so selflessly. You don't want anything, so simple. And it's like, yeah, it would be an honor to have you as a son. He says, well, so then if you have 6 sons, what do you do? Well, I would divide it in 6 parts. He says, but I don't even want your part. Can you give it to your fellow brother Manu in the city? Just like that. From his character, it inspired people to give to him. And he said, I don't have the pockets to hold all this, but you pay it forward. You give it to Manu. And 5 million acres were committed like that. I mean, this is absolutely unprecedented in human history. No one has shown such an example. It's not like you're talking about love in some hippie-dippy moment. It's like, this is frontline, hardcore, transformative work. And concrete, right? With 5 million acres of land actually being transferred. And so I think what that teaches us ultimately is to say, well, what are these intrinsic motivators? We know about extrinsic motivators, right? We know about money and power and fame. I can tell you, oh my God, Vikram, you do this, you're going to be the CEO. And there's a kind of thrill to that. Right. And then you're a CEO and you're like, oh, I'm a CEO of 10,000 people. And I'm CEO of a 10,000 person company that's featured on the front page of the newspapers. And not only is it featured on the front page, you've got a Nobel Peace Prize now. Right. Like, and a certain kind of high. You kind of look at the superheroes in your Bollywood and Hollywood films and you're like, yeah, that guy won everything. But this is an entirely different narrative. And how do you hold that? This is a narrative of saying, yeah, I actually don't have pockets to hold the life's greatest jewels, and I don't want to. And I'm just going to be unconditionally loving. I'm going to connect heart to heart. He said the sole purpose of my work was to connect heart to heart and then get out of the way. So how, what is that, right? And how do you organize your life around that? And where is the narrative of that? And you're not going to hear this in the school newspapers, right? Like you're not going to, or forget school newspapers. You're not going to hear it in traditional media. This is a very different narrative. And how can we, not just hear it, but then search deep down inside ourselves and say, well, how do I relate to that? You can't unsee the example. Once you've seen it, you're like, okay, well, this is possible in human history. You're like, all right, well, what am I going to do? What's going to be my contribution to life, and in which direction, through what kind of motivations? So yeah, lots to think about.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that was the perfect answer, if I'm being honest. And you talk a lot about benevolence and magnanimity. And so I just want to know how you went from being such a high achiever in college and someone who was in a position of service and generosity. And I think I read somewhere in one of yours that you felt that you were climbing up the corporate ladder, but the ladder was up against a wall. So yeah, so I just want to know how you were able to, yeah.
Yeah, no, well, it's a long process. I think it's still going on. It's because there's so much conditioning on that side. But I think for me, so I'm an engineer by trade, and so we tend to think in flow charts and logic and things like that. That's not actually how life happens, but we like to think it happens like that. So I took. I said, well, what's the mission and how do I get there? And I think for me, the mission was, oh, I want to be happy. Like this is, and when I was about your age, I said, well, what do I really want, right? If you think deeply about it, all these things are a means to an end. And I said, well, what might the end be? Well, I want to be happy. So then, like with the scientific precision, you kind of look at it and you say, well, what is it that's going to make me happy? Well, I don't know, but people say that if you have a lot, you'll be happy. So I went out and I said, well, let's research that. So I studied people who had a lot, and I met some people who had a lot. And then I also met people, like good researchers, you kind of have to look at, all ends of the spectrum, right? So I met people who didn't have anything. And I was like, oh, wait a second. Like there are people who have nothing and they're still happy. Right? Many monks and nuns have absolutely nothing, and they were like incredibly happy, right? And so you're like, wait a second, okay, maybe happiness doesn't have anything to do with how much you have, because there were many, not to say that if you have a lot, you're necessarily like, unhappy, but there were many people who have a lot and they're pretty unhappy. And there are many people who had nothing and they were unhappy, but there were also happy people across the spectrum. So I was like, this is not a differentiating factor. So then you go and you say, well, what else, right? You go down the list. And at some point I realized, I grew up in the Silicon Valley and in the .com era, right? This is like the greed gold rush. This is where all these people, all the billionaires of today, like started there. And so we were, there was this kind of pregnant feeling of like, oh my God, this is it. Like, this is a once in a generation opportunity to really cash in. But certainly it ended up being that way. So we would have all kinds of funky billboards, and at that time, and you're driving down, I remember seeing one from this company called eToys, which at that time was a thing. And it said, he who dies with the most toys still dies. And somehow it really hit me. And I don't know, maybe I was in that state of mind or something. I was like, man, maybe this is up against the wrong wall, right? Like maybe I should explore. It's not just about getting all these things to get somewhere. Maybe it's about actually emptying so I can fall into my natural state, which is about interconnection. Right? And so I started to go in this, I started experimenting in the opposite direction, literally like a scientist. I was like, well, there's the acquisition mindset and then there's the emptying mindset. I want to explore what happens there. So what I discovered just by small acts of kindness, small acts of love. So we would go to a homeless, we would go to a homeless shelter and say, how can we help? We would literally go out to the streets and do, be of service. We would sometimes even just hold up signs that say, hey, smile, have a good day, right? Literally 4 people in 4 directions at one intersection, and then at every intersection on that road. And you're just trying to honk if honk for a smile, and all these things that we would do like when we were young. And it's amazing. Try it, like go and take over a street like for a half an hour and hold up a sign that invites people to smile. And some people may not, and some people may even get angry, but like, see how you feel. And what I noticed is that when I'm doing small acts of kindness selflessly for other people, small acts of service, I don't know how much it changes the world, but it definitely changes me. So there is not just an external ripple effect, there is an inner ripple effect. And you don't need to believe anybody, you just have to go out and try it. Like literally go out, hold up a sign for a half an hour and tell me how you feel at the end of that half an hour. I mean, it's guaranteed. So you're like just logically looking at it, you're like, okay, what's actually happening? How can I feel like this natural high if I invest my half an hour here versus like watching Netflix we didn't have Netflix back then, but even if you did, and what's the difference? And so I looked at it and I realized that when we are generous, we are actually creating a very deep bond with the other. This is very different than a Instagram follower or a Facebook friend or a Twitter follower, right? Like this is a very deep bond. Even if you don't know the identification of the other person, like even if you will never see them again, there's a very deep bond that ends up manifesting. And if you create all of those deep bonds over time, what you end up with is like a web of resilience. So think of it like a trampoline. Like we're all going to fall in life. Like there's no, suffering is coming to all of us in one way, shape, or form. Now, if you fall on a cement floor, it's going to hurt. But if you fall on a trampoline, you bounce back up way more. So what is the trampoline, right? How do you create the trampoline? And for me, I discovered that when I am doing small acts of service, small acts of kindness, though each one of those acts transforms me and creates this invisible bond with another. And as you do that, you create the conditions for a trampoline. And then when you fall, a saint is not somebody who never falls. A saint is somebody who falls 99 times, but gets up 100, right? So that is the capacity to rebound back from life's setbacks is what is afforded to you when you have these strands of genuine generosity, even if the other person doesn't notice that it's there. I'll tell you one quick story. When I was like 14 or something, I was going in India. I went back to India for the first time. I grew up in India, and then we immigrated to the US. This was my first trip back. And I had a friend from kindergarten. And this guy had just gotten one of those sort of faux motorbikes, a Luna or something, then he wanted to show it off because we used to bicycle to school like 7 kilometers every day. And so he was like, man, now I've got this thing, you got to jump on, let's go, and so we would go. And then he started showing, like teenagers, right? He started showing off a little bit. He started going a little faster than we really should have. And I was like, hey, man, look, I've got an American stomach now. I'm going to throw up unless you slow down, and there are these potholes. And so we were like going up and down, up and down. And I was like, look, you really got to slow down. Otherwise, I'm going to throw up. And he was like, no, man. So, okay, keep going then. And then I guess what happened? I threw up. So here we are, like these 2 awkward teenagers, without our moms now, on the street. And it was a beautiful moment because this one random passerby stops, and he has a small little bag, and he goes to a nearby stall, and he takes out a lemon from his bag, and he cuts that lemon in half, and he comes over to me. And he gives me that lemon. After you've thrown up, a little bit of citrus clearly makes you feel good, right? But what was most remarkable about it was he gave me the lemon and he disappeared. Like he didn't need to know my name. He didn't need to stay connected. He didn't need to get something out of it. he wasn't like making me feel like, hey, you're a crazy young teenager and, I'm now going to give you some wisdom, none of that. It was just a little lemonade. And then I thought about it and I'm like, how many people, like, if you cut a lemon, you're like, if you had an abundance of lemons, you're going to give both the lemon pieces, right? Like, you're not going to give half and put the other half in your bag, but he put the other half in there. Maybe that was all he had. And he says, I'm going to share half because I noticed something where I could be helpful. And here I am decades later, remembering him, thinking about him. And so this kind of, to realize that every small act, like one thing is he was amazing. The second thing is, oh, this interaction was amazing. Third thing is, oh, I'm telling this story. But really the question that kept coming up for me is, how can I be that guy for other people? Right? How can I be that for Vikram and Veer today, here and now, maybe, so that, like, you may not even stay in touch with me, but maybe a ripple of something continues in your heart. So, 20 years later, it's kind of led to something that still is alive in you. And so I look at that as a phenomenal way to perhaps even create change. So yeah, that's a long way to say I learned to be kind, and it actually helped me more than I'm helping others, perhaps.
That was absolutely phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that really was. So I also wanted to talk to you about Karma Kitchen. So in one of your talks, you described that our economic models are built on simple ideas, on the simple idea, which is that people aim to maximize their self-interest, that people are selfish. Your work is built on the idea that people actually want to be selfless. I was especially impressed by the idea behind Karma Kitchen, so which is a restaurant your team created and now runs globally. Could you describe to us the idea behind Karma Kitchen and what it tells us about building a generosity-first economic model?
Yeah. So if you extend this idea of small acts of kindness, you say, I can do small acts of kindness, but what happens if all of us on this call decide to operate from that space? So what would happen collectively to us, but also, individually to us, but also collectively? So Karma Kitchen is a place, it's a restaurant, it's a pop-up restaurant, essentially a restaurant that a bunch of volunteers take over for an evening or two, or sometimes more, sometimes 7 days a week. And you take this over and you say, look, we're gonna run it by different rules. You still get a great meal, but at the end of the meal, your check reads zero. It's zero, not because it's free, zero because someone before you has paid for you, and you are trusted to pay forward whatever you want for people after you. Will people, now imagine if this happened to you, right? Like, what do? Do you pay? Are you gonna be like, well, okay, this meal is actually worth, I could get it next door for $10, and so I'm gonna give $10. Or, okay, maybe a little bit more, there's like nice people here, I'll give $12. Or, yeah, okay, I can get away with it, things are kind of rough for me right now, maybe $5. What do you do? And collectively, like, we have an answer to that. Everybody would say, like, the collective narrative in the world today is to say, people are selfish. People aim to maximize self-interest. This is the basis of economics, that there are people are rational and they maximize self-interest. And so we were like, is that really true? That feels true. That may even be true in certain contexts, but what if you change the context? What if you walk in and the whole place is run by volunteers? What if someone who greets you takes out a kindness deck and like says, hey, while you wait for your card, while you wait for your food, like, draw a card from this and, have that kind of conversation on your table? What if under your table you start to see like, an inspiring quote? What if you kind of look around the restaurant and you see that, oh my God, like, no one is paying for themselves. What if you start to feel into the collective vibration of the place and you say, it's a very different energy, right? Like you walk in where everyone's like, oh, this is owed to me. Where's my food? It hasn't yet come. Versus like, oh my God, like you're paying for this person's paying for me, this person's paying for, you know, you're like, wow, it kind of dawns on you, right? And then at some point you're eating your meal and you're thinking, wait, so somebody has signed up to do 8 hours of dishes and I won't even see them. They're in the back. Like instead of sitting at home watching TV or something, they've signed up to do my plates. Right. And there is zero feedback loop going on with them, like no immediate feedback loop. Like, what is it that motivates them? So pretty soon you start to feel into this context. No one is telling you any of this, but you start to feel into this context. And if you have a strong enough context, generosity begets generosity. And this was upending so much. I mean, at one point it was like the highest rated restaurant on Yelp. Yelp is this peer review sort of site. And across all of Berkeley, where we had originally started it. And we were like, there were huge lines just to get in. Like people wanted a generosity experience. There were huge lines to just sign up to volunteer, right? Like, so we were like, there's abundance of everything. And we were totally covering all our costs. And so we were like, what's going on? Like, isn't this just a better way to do life? Like, why would you go in and like, well, why don't hair salons do it in this way, right? Like, why doesn't the whole world, why doesn't an ice cream shop operate in this way? And we realize it's because there's a lack of, it's not because generosity doesn't work. It's because we don't know how to create the context where generosity can thrive. Vinoba was able to create a context for generosity to thrive. And the huge part of that context is who you are. And maybe you're not a perfect person like Vinoba perhaps was, right? Maybe I'm not like, but maybe at Karma Kitchen, I can give rise to that part of me. For those 3 hours, maybe I'm just committed, you know, to bringing this up. And so people would write all these media stories. And at some point, we realized that they were like confusing a lot of the elements of it, because we would tell them that exactly what I told you. And they would be like, oh, okay. And this is a charity case. We're like, there's no charity. It's peer to peer, man. You're helping this person and that person's helping that person. The reason why we need charity in the world is because of this inequality. This is actually working at a different level. And people would confuse that idea and still report. And so we had this new rule. We were like, you want to do a story? Fantastic. What you have to do is volunteer here first. So we had, like, at that time, newspapers, you know, the olden days. We had a newspaper. We had one of the biggest newspapers in our area. A board member from this, on the editorial board or something, she came and she says she wants to do a story. She says, we heard about this from Deepak Chopra, you know, we'd like to, and this is an amazing story. And it's a story of like immigrants doing, well, she had all these angles, and we're like, okay, yeah, it's great. You should volunteer. And she was like, okay, you want me to like bus tables? And we were like, yeah. And she did it. And she wrote about it. And she says, oh my God, you know, she's like, by the end of the day, I was exhausted. People had all kinds of moods, and it was not, but he's like, somehow I feel great, right? And it was a spectacular story. And in fact, UC Berkeley then ended up doing research on this because it created such a buzz. Everyone's like, can it work in other settings? And the title of the paper, seminal paper, which is now widely cited all over the world, the title of it was Paying More When Paying for Others. So yes, it's not going to work for your Lexus car dealership, right? Like if you say, pay whatever you want, you know, get your car, it's not going to, but it is going to work for so many things. And if, as a society, if we just have a transactional world, we are shortchanging ourselves. So we have to have some transaction, sure. You know, if you're building roads, helps to have a different kind of framework. But for many things, you can actually utilize a generosity-driven framework. And right now we're like at 0 to, maybe 99 to 1. I don't know, but it needs to be a lot healthier. And for that, we need to ignite that in our hearts.
Yeah, so thank you. I think the Karma Kitchen addresses scaling generosity very well. And I think along those lines, I often think about scale and empathy as well. And so, like when the first radio came out, a lot of people said that because we can now hear the voices of other people in other countries, all the wars would stop. And then when the first TV came out, a lot of people said that seeing other people would help us develop empathy. And I think the question arises about how do you like can technology play a role in scaling empathy? And is empathy even something that can be scaled? Or is empathy something that comes from pure human to human connection? So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I would defer this to you guys. This is a question that you should be asking as a younger generation, as younger entrepreneurs. What is the right balance? I don't, I think a lot of people will tell you, look, this human to human offline connection is most primed for a deep connection. I think there's some truth to that. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of, capacities around online connections as well. Like you're able to connect across geographies, you're able to connect asynchronously, you're able to share content and build a different kind of context. And so I think it's an open question. I think it's an open question about balance between the offline and online worlds. Now, the problem with the current online offerings that you see is they have no balance. Right? They're just like, if you go in and ask, the Facebook designers of the world, they're like, would you rather have Nipun and Vikram hug in person or Nipun and Veer send an online emoji of a hug? And they would prefer an online emoji because you're still on their network, right? They don't want you to go off their network because the longer you stay on their network, the more they can monetize that. And that is not skillful. That's not the right balance. Would our world be better off without all these technologies? I don't go there. I mean, I think for me, there's phenomenal. I think technology has changed the world in phenomenal ways. I mean, look at the COVID vaccine. In 1 year, like this is unheard of in human history. We had this incredible thing that could have just crippled all of humanity. And science has really been, it's been a remarkable story of science, of technology. So you have that, but what is the right balance? What is appropriate technology? And how will we answer that kind of question? So I'll give you a concrete example. We said that, look, there's all this AI being used in different directions. We should see what a compassion bot would look like. Right? You call up Microsoft, and these days Microsoft has a bot responding to you, like all big companies do. So we were like, what would a compassion bot look like? So we went to like the top AI designers in the Silicon Valley, and we started brainstorming. And their minds were so in the commercial realm that it was very hard for them to think in a service-based kind of a way. So it took some time. And then we had a demo. So you give a website, and the problem we were trying to solve was if you Google like givers, right, on Google, what are you going to get? You're going to get Bill Gates, you're going to get Warren Buffett, you're going to, but you're not going to get like the Udeshi Kaka whose story I told you about that gave me the sweets, right, or that fed us that one day. Why? Because the system is biased in that kind of a direction. And so you say, well, I want givers to kind of show up there. And even when you talk about compassion and kindness, what are the stories that come? This is like the page 3 stories that come up, right? Like this is not, I mean, that's good. I would say good for them to at least do that than nothing, right? But this is not like the Vinoba kind of kindness that we're talking about here, like this deep thing. So how do we circulate that? And what is the intelligence of that? So we said, let's create like this compassion bot. And what it would do is at a very base case use of it was you give it a website, you give it a story, and it gives you a compassion score. But compassion score from our sort of 20 years of service-based metrics, right? Like not just like, oh, it has these words, and it's a lot more contextual. And it is profound. We're still working on it. So, but with the punchline of this story though is when we had this team of people come over to one of our service-based retreats and demo it. And the guy says something very interesting, the lead designer, who is like one of the most sought after AI sort of designers in the Valley. He says something very interesting. He says that we've been working on this for 2 years. Now, it took me 22 months to figure out service space, to figure out the organizing principles, to figure out what was going on through Vinoba's mind, and 2 months to build it. And that is how we're going to get to appropriate balance. Right? So it's a question of, are we as designers of new solutions willing to hold that space so that we can deprogram ourselves and expose ourselves to new organizing principles that can bring us into a very different balance, that can bring us even before that balance to holding very different kind of questions. And that, are you willing to do that? Am I willing to do that? If we are, am I willing to fail at it even? Are we willing to fail at it collectively? And if we are, then all of a sudden, I think we will have a very different kind of progress, very different kind of solution set. Otherwise, you're just like cranking out stuff that has market value and you're trying to get ahead in that kind of game. And that we know is a dead end. Like, I don't think the current market solutions are going to lead us to any empathy. I don't think the current incubators are going to lead us to any significantly new pattern. I think we need new patterns, not just a new business, right? And that new pattern starts from within us. Starts from those 22 months of commitment to say, okay, I'm willing to relook at my, the colonization of my mind.
All right, so I think there also comes this aspect of sustainability, and I kind of wanted to talk to you about my project that I've been working on. Manu, do you think you could share your screen?
Absolutely. So Nipunji, what we'll do is just over the next 5 minutes, I think both Vikram and Veer want to show you their projects. Would that be okay?
Of course, yes. Perfect. I would be excited about it.
And they're big fans, as you know, so they're eager to get your feedback and learn more about how they can make it more empathetic, right? So I'll just share my screen. Oh, sorry. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. Yes, Vikram, go ahead.
Okay, so here's a project I've been working on called Zlatan. It's really my tool to fight fast fashion, and it's what I like to call an activist for sustainability in fashion. So on this page, along with our partners at Remake, we've created an in-depth analysis of what brands are doing for the environment. So once you click on a logo, let's take Supreme, for example.
Yeah.
So so here you're able to see a short analysis of what the brand is doing to be sustainable. So they're assessed on 5 key aspects. So these include transparency and traceability, maker well-being, environmental sustainability, their use of sustainable raw materials, and then leadership, diversity, and inclusion. So we don't only look at assessing the brands from an environmental standpoint, but we also try to evaluate their contribution to the well-being of their employees. That's not all. We also provide an analysis that goes into greater detail to help you get a better understanding of what we mean by the 5 key aspects. So to access that, you click on the transparency report button back there. But fortunately, not all brands score as low as Supreme. Could we take a look at Lululemon? So here, they've received a score of 48 out of 100. It's not great, but we do consider that as the bare minimum, and they do outperform most other brands on this page. So one of the things that I'm trying to do with Zlatan is to inspire people to shop more responsibly and also shop from sustainable brands. So the question really is, how do you think we can get people to care about their carbon footprint? And how can we get brands to care about how they impact the planet?
Yeah, oh, this is great. I'm so happy to hear that you guys are taking this initiative. Yeah, I'm just at my first feedback is it's great that you guys are doing it. I would say, so my core thought for you to explore would be, how do you make it more community oriented? So there is a solution. There are many solutions where you go in, because if you play this out, you say, okay, we have this dashboard. And now, so it's an information solution. So you're solving for, it's something that, let's say I go and buy a Supreme soap bar. I mean, Supreme's got everything, right? So you go in and you get one of these, one of their products, and you say, I want to shop responsibly. And you provide an information solution, which is helpful. But can we go a little deeper than just information alone? And so then you're asking the question, well, how do we actually get brands to then say, hey, there are 20 Nipuns who care about this score, or maybe a million, then, will you change your behavior? Or rather that you should change your behavior because so many people do. And that's a second degree of value proposition. But I would invite you to go even one step further and say that, how do you start to think more in a peer-to-peer way? How do you start to create community around it? And what that community does is it starts to, there's so much research that if I actually want to change your behavior, telling you about it. So you can think of it this way, right? Like if let's say you're smoking and you're my brother, and I don't want you to smoke because I think it's a bad idea. I could tell you all kinds of things, right? And I could show you all kinds of data. I could show you even your x-ray of what happens when you talk to your lungs when you smoke. That's not that effective in changing your behavior. So that's more awareness building. So right now you have a solution that's more about awareness. Then you go a little deeper and you say, well, I want to create this impact, right? And so you create these nicotine patches. So a nicotine patch helps you move from your addiction because it's so hard to get rid of that addiction. And this helps you wean off of that, right? You put that patch on, it gives you to in small doses until you're like gone. And you're like, okay, that changed something. And that's impact. But if you go a little further and you say, well, how do I create transformation? Because then what you did was you stopped smoking, but now you're addicted to chocolate. So the pattern of addiction hasn't really gone away, right? So how do you actually go to transformation? And this is where, if you look at the three spheres, you have awareness, impact, and transformation. And most of the people lead with, either awareness or impact. But if you look at people like Gandhi and Vinoba and even Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, you can go down the list. They led with inner transformation. They led with this transformation bit. So it doesn't mean you ignore awareness. You still need that information solution. Doesn't mean you ignore impact, right? You still need to go and tell the companies to change their behavior. But what does it mean to lead with transformation? And as you lead with transformation, you realize that the community piece is how you transform people. You cannot transform people as a company, right? You cannot transform people as a top-down sort of solution. It comes peer-to-peer, heart-to-heart. And you look at what Vinoba's profound insight is he is going village to village. He says the sole purpose of my work, not India's independence, not India's upliftment, none of that, not these projects. He had so many projects. He says the sole purpose is to connect heart to heart. Heart to heart, not heart to brand, not heart to information, not heart to nicotine patch, heart to heart. So thinking about that and saying, okay, I'm interested. I don't have this dashboard. So you're solving that problem for me. So that's great. Now I come in. But there are 20 Nipuns that come in. Can you connect them together? And how do you connect them? You can connect them. You were mentioning the TEDx talk at Berkeley, right? But in it, I give this example of carbon atoms in a piece of graphite. And it's the same carbon atoms, right? If you arranged in one way, create a piece of graphite, arranged in a different way, create a diamond. So what is the arrangement? It's not just community. It's not just people, right? Facebook's got plenty of people. It's not really helping things. So it's not just people, it's not just creating that network, it's also then about thinking, what is the configuration of those people? What are the values underneath it that inform those configurations? And how does that then ultimately lead to ecosystem of Zatlan? I don't know if I'm saying it, it's the ZL, right? So how does that ecosystem of Zatlan veer towards leading with transformation while still raising awareness, while still creating impact? And that, I think, makes it a revolutionary project, not just on business, right?
Absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. Veer, are you still with us? You are, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I keep losing connection.
No worries. Nipunji, I know we only had you for another 4 minutes. Do you mind if we go for 10 minutes from now? Would that be okay?
Sure, sure.
Perfect. Veer, would you like to describe what you've created?
Yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
I assumed that it was both of their projects. So Veer's got a different project. Okay,
Yes,
that's great.
yes.
Yeah. Oh, just one second. Yeah. So I'd say the empathy project is my own tool to explore the question of whether technology plays a role in scaling empathy. And it's essentially an initiative to profile the stories of hope, human achievement, and success. And with it, I hope to amplify these stories of vulnerable communities and support them in any way I can. So this particular website that you're seeing here is dedicated towards spreading the stories of Indian athletes and aims to evoke empathy in our users to then channel that empathy into action. So you can see with the first prompt, the chances to succeed are 30, while the will to succeed is 100. And as you move ahead in the game, your chances and your will may decrease or increase depending on the choices that you make. So over here, I'm forced to choose between either dropping out of school or staying in school. So I may choose to drop out of school.
Okay.
Yeah, now you can see that the chances to succeed and will to succeed has decreased because of the pressure from everyone else around you.
Yeah.
And I think as you go further down, you scroll down a little bit, I've added a picture to just reflect the situation that you're in. And yeah, just show a real life example. Yeah.
Yeah.
So over here, I may choose to take a loan of 4,000. And again, you're facing a lot of struggles, and eventually the give up option starts to become that much more enticing. So that's essentially the aim with this project. So maybe I choose to help out at my parents' farm. Yeah, and again, it's the same issue where your will is decreasing as well as your chances. And I would choose to join the army.
Huh.
And then stay back in Patiala. Participate in the nationals. Yeah, so I finally succeeded. This was a very short sample of what the website essentially does. And if you click on next, the user is directed towards the final page where you're given the option to either donate or volunteer. So then, like, after completing the journey, we're relying on the hope that our users have been able to empathize with these athletes to then feel obliged to take action and support our cause in any way, or just help us in any way at all, and to finally support Indian sportsmen and sportswomen. So yeah.
Wow. I have a question so I can understand it a little bit better, but I love it. I think it's very creative. What so is it just for people approaching trying to have a career in sports, or what is your audience for this?
Okay, so I can tell you a little bit about why I created this.
Yeah, sure.
So I think it all began around the time of the Olympics, where people would constantly ask me the question, why is India so bad at this sport? Why why are they winning like one medal in like 10 Olympics, one gold medal?
Yeah.
And so I was kind of hurt with that question, and I wanted to do my own research to see why we're in such a horrible position with regards to sports. So I did this research, and I empathize with these athletes. So I wanted other people to do the same, and eventually I created the Empathy Project. Yeah.
Mm.
So it's
That's
for
wonderful.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
anyone
Go
who's
ahead.
interested in learning about Indian athletes in general.
Yeah. I think if you lead with that, that's a very compelling. I would personally sign up because, I faced all kinds of problems. No one in my family except one of my uncles who was super supportive when I said, I was like, I have, Berkeley, engineering career, software, all that, and then tennis, right? Like, and they were like, okay, that's great that you do it on the side, but like that's not something you do. My uncle was actually on the Bombay cricket team in the previous generation at one of the clubs, and so like he used to hang out with the Gavaskars of the day, and so he was like the only one that he would, and I know firsthand like how difficult these lives are, and part of it is a systemic government solution. A part of it is just the narrative and the stories that we hold as a culture. And then there's a part of it is, so I think what you're doing from my limited lens here is you're trying to shift the narrative of the public. So it's not just as simple as why doesn't India have this? It's like, well, how are we holding up our sports athletes? How are we supporting them? And this is true really across the world. Like a gold medalist, actually, they end up making 30,000 US dollars, which if you convert to US context, in the Indian rupees, it might sound like a lot, but it's actually nothing. So the value of the amount of hours that you would put in to get a gold medal and the valuation of that in terms of market value is like almost nothing. And so you look at that and you say, how do we stop making, so there's like so many questions, right, that come up as you start to hold this. So I really like the creativity of the gaming sort of scenario, the gamification kind of a thing that you have done. I think that's fantastic. I think what you're trying to do is really shift the narrative of the people, which can then ripple into systems, and it can then ripple into sports players as well. But at the core of it, you're trying to change the narrative, which I think is phenomenal. So how do you start to engage people at that level? How do you start to say, like, what is the end game? That's what I would ask you. For you, like, I come to your site, you want to help me change the narrative, you want me to empathize with the players, but can you actually like help me go a little deeper, right? How can I get engaged? Maybe I can volunteer, maybe I can support a local athlete, maybe I can, like, if you can list 10 different ways, if you can create an engagement spectrum. So think of a person that actually is like I am, like I'm interested in your mission. And so I go to your site and I say, oh, this is kind of fun. Let me see, how would I do this? And it's like, oh, it's kind of hard because everywhere I kind of end up losing. And it's like, oh, okay, well, what is the point of intervention? There are so many points of intervention. Like at the end, you talk about donate and get engaged, but like there, you can do this to shift like step 2, the answer to step 2. If I choose A, I go to, you will not succeed. If I choose B, I will go here. So what is the intervention that I can take after my empathy quiz, so I can support that shift from choice A to choice B? And like that, I think you can actually have a whole series of these interventions across the board. And so if you think in that way and you say, okay, well, here are, would you like to intervene at this level, at this level, at this level, at this level, or this level, then you will be able to engage a lot more people post the quiz. So thinking of, and drawing a through line from like that intervention to your final goal of shifting the narrative. If you do this, it will help you change step 2. That will help this ultimate goal of creating a new narrative around sports. If you do this, it will help step 3 transformation with the ultimate goal of shifting our narrative around this culturally, right? Like, so if you can show all that to me, and if you can create that spectrum, that would be fantastic. People love these quizzes online. Like, that's how Cambridge Analytica got, did all this mischief in the world, but that's a bad example. But what I really also like is the stories that you kind of put in at each one. So you had a sad story, but you can also have, like a balance of stories on all sides. And so don't try to give an answer, help them ask a new question. Because if you give an answer, if you say, look, here's a situation and the situation is sad, instead, it's more powerful if you say, here's the situation and here's the spectrum of sad, okay, happy. And here's some research on it that actually sad outweighs the happy, but happy's there too. So then it's like super balanced and you're sort of confusing them in a way, but that confusion awakens a different question in them. And that's going to be way more powerful. Like if you help me as a viewer, if you help me ask a question, that's much, much more powerful than you giving me an answer. So thinking of that as a design principle as well.
Absolutely love that. Do we have time for one final question, Nipunji?
Sure, sure, yes. Yes.
Okay, Vikram, there you go.
Yeah.
One final question. Thank you so much.
You were talking about shifting the narrative, and I think from my perspective, I would say that you're trying to shift the narrative to, live life well. But I really wanted to try and understand how you would define a life well lived. I guess most of the people in this room are young, and we would love to know how you define a meaningful life.
Well, good question. I would. But what does a life of service mean? I think you can be a life of service. I think you can be an everyday hero and lead a life of service. So service isn't so much the external work that we do, but it's the inner orientation that we bring to it. That I think we can meet people and connect with people from a me to me kind of a connection. I'm in the me space in me and you're in the me space in you, and we kind of create a transactional relationship. But I also have the option to meet you from a we space. And if I meet you from a we space, even if you're in the me space, it changes the dynamic. And what's even more powerful is that if I'm in the we space in me and you also end up being in the we space in you, then the possibilities of that we to we connection, off the charts. If two people come together and say, let's start a business, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, that's a certain level of depth. That's a certain level. The tensile strength, if you think about it, is X, but the tensile strength of something that's like we to we, oh my God, like you just cannot compare to, I mean, it's just like, it's not even dial-up connection to fiber optics. It's just like way off the charts. Gandhi called it the law of love. So he says this law of love actually works with greater precision than the law of gravity or the law of electricity. This is the actual quote from Gandhi. But he says the modern science just hasn't explored this enough. And so to me, I think service is a way of exploring the law of love, and our reward for it is this incredible bonds, deep bonds. And until you explore it, you don't even realize this is possible. You're stuck in a dial-up world. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, gigabit speed. This is what I'm talking about. So I would say a life well lived is a life of service, which allows you to be in greater congruence with the law of love.
Okay.
Incredible.
Thank you Thank you so much for speaking with us. I think you've left us all really inspired, and there's a lot to think about. So I'd just like to say thank you.
Oh, thank you, Vikram. And thank you,
so
Veer, as
much.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for the feedback, and thank you so much for amazing words. I think I'll look into the volunteering and just get a connection with my empathy project. And yeah, just thank you overall.
And thank you guys, for taking a stance. Like, forget about failure. I've always felt that people have these success clubs, right? Like, not success clubs, but intrinsically we applaud people who are successful. I think we should have failure clubs where we applaud people who oh my God, you failed. Congratulations, Veer. Like, you tried something. The best way to avoid problems in the world is to do nothing. But you guys are, you're like trying, you're going out there and you're saying, so I'd say keep trying, keep failing, and don't listen to other people. Maybe if it lands, it lands. Otherwise, just, listen to the rhythm of your heart, fail, but be ready to adapt, be agile. So if you fail, you're like, okay, maybe this was a bad idea. But that insight will be so deep, you'll be better, you'll be stronger the next time you try. And so find that trampoline and keep failing in love. So that would be my wish for you. Thank you all for inviting me into your field of love. And if I can support in any way, you know how to find me. So.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. And the other way also, I think a lot of our students want to support you. So I'm going to be sending all the information about Service Space, the incredible work that you do, incredible projects to do. And I hope you see a lot of volunteers from Project Mahatma. It's the least we can do. Thank you so much for such a lovely, lovely session. Nipunji, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Did I hear Shibani was trying to say something, maybe? Or maybe I just saw her lips moving. Maybe not.
You're on mute.
I think she's on mute, but I think she is trying to say something.
Not able to get unmuted.
Okay. At least on my screen, it's on the bottom left of my screen where you hit mute, unmute.
Unmute. Yeah, okay, now it works. Yeah.
There it is.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, so there's this, I actually wanted to just let you know that I did, I saw your TEDx talk at UNC, and I was, when you were talking about understanding the flow, there was this, you took this example of the lemon tree and the lemon, and that whole explanation suddenly made me understand why in so many different art forms, genres of art, where the tree of life actually is, it's an important element in each one of these different genres. And the tree of life just suddenly made sense to me. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. Yeah,
thank you. Yes, thank you for reminding me. I had forgotten about that. Yes, indeed. Well, fantastic. I appreciate all of you holding that tree of life, holding that law of love, holding that grace of the universe in our laps. So thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, Manu.
Thank you so much, Nipunji. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Veer and Vikram, you killed it. You were so good. You were so good, and you were just incredible with everything. Amazing. Perfect. Do you guys like
Like,
it? Like, what's up?
yeah. Can we stick around after, like, till everyone leaves?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll stop the recording.